5, 4, 3, 2.
I'm on?
Yes.
Good evening, Openglen. I'm Susan Phillips. I pastor the Presbyterian Church in Shawano, Wisconsin, and lots of friends and neighbors around the area. And I'm glad that you're here tonight. We are in the week that we celebrate Earth Day, but of course, every day is Earth Day. And tonight in the studio, virtual studio, real studio, I am accompanied by Dara Stull and Aaron Walrich, and hopefully we'll be accompanied online by other friends who will join the chat and participate in some conversation about caring for God's creation.
Joanne and Jim are here.
Hi, Joanne and Jim. I'm glad to see you. Glad you're here. This week in our church, we have all sorts of ways that we are celebrating Earth Day and attending to the fact that the very creation, everything in creation is the work of God, and that we are sustained body and soul by God's creation. And so we're celebrating that in worship yesterday and this coming Sunday, and we are learning about that after worship on Sunday and also at the community dinner on Tuesday night at 5:30. And we will be geocaching and discovering surprising things around our community. We're going to be talking about our bike and kite event coming up next month. We'll be thinking about and working together on plans for a prayer garden at our church, and also learning about trees and how we can be better stewards of the environment. And so you are invited, if you're anywhere in the neighborhood of Shawano, to come be a part of any of those celebrations coming up on Sunday and on Tuesday. And Skip Jones, one of our local folk music rock stars, is going to be with us at the community dinner as well. I wanted to start actually at Dara's suggestion in Genesis. I suppose a good place to start is at the beginning, and with the creation story. And maybe it's helpful to point out that in Genesis there are actually two creation stories. There's one that's the priestly story, which is cosmic and grand, and then there's another creation story that is simple, sort of a folk tale. And so you have both visions in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. But one of the places that Dara and I talked about having some conversation is toward the end of the first chapter of Genesis. I'm going to start with the 26th verse. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild things of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image, and in the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them. God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every living creature that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food." Hey, Dara, why did you want to talk about that particular passage? What was important about that for you?
I think, like you said, it takes us back to the image and or back to the beginning. It gives us some imagery of what it is that we have been called to care for. And we have been given the space and the honor and the privilege of dwelling in being on this earth with the creeping things that creep, and with the waters and the trees, and
Sea monsters.
I think oftentimes we take for granted those gifts, and what a pleasure and what a joy that really is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the language in there where I think we often trip up, especially when we're talking about caring for creation, the role, the relationship of humanity to creation, are the words dominion and subdue. And I think part of the problem that we run into is that historically there have been people who have read into those words a power dynamic that is power over. That if I have dominion, that I get to decide that everything has to serve me and my purposes. And to subdue something, we beat something into submission. And it's very much a power over sort of relationship as opposed to a relationship of mutuality. And so there are a couple of things in here when I read the commentaries on Genesis that I find really compelling. One is that I think we are supposed to have a relationship with creation that parallels the relationship God has with us. And God does not, grind us into submission. God doesn't rule over us in a way that makes us little, that makes us ashamed, that makes us regret having a relationship with God. In this very text, we see God creating, giving, sustaining, blessing. It's this incredibly generous sort of image of God. So if we are made in God's image, all of us, our feminine image, our masculine image, if all of us are made in God's image, then we are called to be creative, giving, sustaining, blessing sorts of people in our relationship with the rest of creation. Is that the kind of thing that you hear, though, from when people talk about the environment or talking about our responsibility with creation?
Are we overstepping our bounds by being meat eaters and things like that?
Are we overstepping our bounds by being meat eaters?
Yes.
Well, it's an interesting question because in the early chapters of Genesis, when Adam and Eve are in the garden, it's really clear that they're eating plants. So are we overstepping our bounds? Well, none of us live in Eden anymore. But I think there are lots of people who try to think about what we consume, whether it's what we eat or drink, but also what we wear and what we use, all the different ways that we consume stuff. I think there are a lot of people who try to pay attention to whether or not that consumption is responsible and is sustainable. And those feel really important. I mean, there's a whole line of theology that says because we have dominion, that means we have the right to exploit the created world, that we can strip it down for all it's worth because it's here to serve us. That feels really short-sighted, though, because I think what happens when we act on that sort of thinking is we end up fouling our own nest. We're at a point in history now where, we were talking about this yesterday in worship, we have seen the earth from space. Those first photographs from the moon of the earth rise instead of the sunrise or the moonrise, we see the earth rise over the edge of the moon's horizon. When we can see the earth from space, we realize that this is all we've got. If we destroy this, we're pretty much done. So I think if we are going to be responsible, then we have to figure out ways to live that are sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did we realize that in human history, though? We started recycling, I guess we just started mass producing things not so long ago, so.
Well, our rates of consumption have increased dramatically, I think, with both the Industrial Revolution and also the population explosion of the last 50 years. I mean, the total population of the world has doubled in 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone from 3.5 billion to 7+ billion people. I mean, one of the lines in Genesis that caught my attention this time, the be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Okay, I think we're full. I mean, it seems like we're full. So maybe we need to stop the multiplying part. Maybe we've accomplished that task, and now we need to back off a little bit. And I'm also really interested, though, in the way this conversation relates. The conversation we're having about creation now and recycling and sustainability with Genesis, and how that parallels a conversation about science and theology. Because I think a lot of people feel like they have to choose. They either have to believe science or they have to believe scripture, but you can't have both. I was a science major in college, and then I went on to seminary, so I like both. And I think the people who wrote Genesis loved observing the world around them. I mean, whomever told those stories, sang those songs, and eventually wrote them down as text, were paying a lot of attention. There's a lot of detail. The birds of the air, the creeping things, the wild things, all the cattle, the kinds of seeds. I mean, they're categorizing, they're cataloging creation. The waters above, the waters below, the land, the oceans, the sky above, the lights by day, the lights by night. But it's a pre-scientific author. So they don't have the same language. They don't have the same information. And I think we diminish scripture if we expect it to function as a 21st century scientific document. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I think we diminish science if we expect it to always agree with a 3,000-year-old sacred text.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can appreciate and hold both. And I'd be interested to hear what some other people think. I think we can be inspired by the beauty of Scripture and the covenantal relationship, the poetry of the text about how we relate, even while we look at the science and continue to be wowed by the wondrous things that keep being discovered.
I think the more you learn, the more you know you don't know.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. I kind of want to take what Aaron just said and go back a little bit to the things that were created in the image of God. I know that there are some who would say that everything they need to know about God, they can learn just through nature, and being in nature, and that's all that they need. I'm curious to hear your response to that school of thought.
Well, I presume that if some people say that all they need to know about God they learn from nature, then that's all they'll know about God. And we get to choose how much we care to learn about God. People who only want to learn about God from Scripture and not from relationships in communities of faith will only learn this part of God. And people who only look at God in nature will only see this part of God.
Well, that would be like saying people that live in a city wouldn't know God as well as someone that lives in the country.
They wouldn't know the same things about God.
Right. So they see it in different places.
Right. My theology says that there is nowhere in all of creation that God isn't. So we can pay attention to the movement of the Spirit, city, country, science lab, sacred text, anywhere. It's a matter of how we pay attention. But I think we set up tripping hazards for ourselves if we say, what I see in nature has to have a one-to-one relationship with what I see somewhere else. Do you know the story about I don't know if they were blind men or blindfolded men, and they're trying to decipher what this thing is in front of them, and one feels up and down and around and is just this mass and decides that what he's feeling is the wall. And the one over here feels something that he decides is thin and narrow and must be the tail, not tail, the rope. And then one over here finds something that's like a hose, and it turns out that they're each describing an elephant, but a different part of the elephant. So if we only look in nature, we're going to discover the wonders of God in nature. And if we only look at Scripture, we can discover the inspiration of God in nature. And if we have relationships with other people, we're going to see the image of God in faces that don't look like ours. And if we go to the city, go to the country, wherever it is we go, if we open ourselves to the presence of God, we discover God there. At least that's that's my theology. How does that sound to you? Does that mean?
Yeah, I question sometimes how much we are doing a disservice to ourselves by constantly trying to put God in a box. So for some, that box is nature, and that's all that they'll see. And is that okay? I mean, should we constantly be striving to keep God in the box or expand our boxes?
I guess it depends on what our goal is. So I think one of the biggest threats right now is extremism, any kind of extremism. And I think if we believe that God only exists in our box and anyone who says otherwise is dangerous, then we can justify all sorts of awful things toward that person. I think if someone says, you know what, I have found God in this box and I am comfortable with God in this box and I'm okay with anyone having other boxes or other experiences, and this is all I can really bear. This is all, I could spend my whole life inside this box learning more about God. Okay. So long as you're not throwing that box at somebody else, as long as you're not hurting somebody else with your box.
So Steve is saying you don't learn in a vacuum, you learn in a community. So if you're taking your community and only looking at in that small box without excluding those other boxes, the communities in those other boxes, are you actually learning? Are you growing by making your box small?
Are you learning by making your box small? So,
keeping your community to just the people that agree with you.
Right. This may not be a satisfying answer, but several years ago, I learned a new word, and the word was irenic. I-R-E-N-I-C. I was accused of being irenic. Had to go look it up. Like, what does that mean? And it means moving toward peace. So I'm trying to live into that. So maybe the difference between those who feel safe in the box and want to stay in the box and those who want to get out of the box, maybe it's a microscope, telescope sort of difference. I mean, people can look through a microscope and look down and down and down at smaller and smaller and smaller elements of the universe and still discover and learn more and more and more. And there are people who can set their sights on the heavens and look through telescopes and look further and further out into space and further back in time and learn more and more about how this wondrous place came to be. And they're both true. They're both valid. They're both valuable. But if you say one is true but not the other, then we have a problem. It's when we claim our own truth as the only truth that our communities start to break down.
So how do we? Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-mm.
So how do we build community around that's centered on stewarding and caring for creation?
um, I think there's so many different ways to build community. So, like, one of the things that I see is people who garden. There are people who love to garden, that when they sink their fingers in the soil, they feel like they are connecting with their source, that they are connecting with God. And then they plant things and they tend things and they grow things, and they accidentally plant 16 piles of zucchini and have more than they could use in a year, and then they start giving it away to other people. And people get it and they don't know, what do you do with a zucchini? I've never made a zucchini before. I don't even know how do you cook a zucchini? And they go online and someone says, oh, I've got a great recipe. Here's my recipe for zucchini bread. And so someone shares a recipe for zucchini bread, and they start making zucchini bread and they share it with a neighbor. And I think it happens in all sorts of little ways. But it requires us to pay attention to the fact that we have a responsibility for the creation itself. That at this point, humanity has grown so expansively and so powerfully that we within this generation have the power to destroy creation. In my lifetime, we have developed the power to destroy creation, unlike anything the world has ever seen. And so, acknowledging that reality and accepting the responsibility for caring for creation seems all the more important. And I think one of the ways we build that community is having conversations like this. And hopefully folks who are here now will share the conversation with others. And it'll keep going.
Let me ask you this. There's every movie that comes out, 50% of them have to do with the world ending. Does that seem fair? So what do you think it is about us that wants, they're obviously making money. What do you think it is about us that craves that seeing that? It's really weird.
Yeah. So I think part of it is probably we have a fascination with our own power. We're back to that dominion stuff. Mm-hmm. We are powerful. It fascinates us. Being powerful, it feels good, right? We like being powerful.
I'd say it's its own form of idolatry.
Yeah. Say more about that.
There are so many things that we worship and we idolize, and power is one of them. And you see that and you hear it in business places, in elections, in social groups. There's always someone who is vying just to get more power. Right. And it's a kind of currency that we use.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so when we read Genesis and we read into that idea that that God has dominion and we are supposed to have dominion, ultimately doesn't really work, because in that story and in reality, we exist as part of this intricate, elaborate, phenomenally diverse web, and we don't exist without the rest of creation. Like the conversation around bees right now, and how the bee population has taken a significant hit. If we don't have bees, if we don't have pollinators, we don't eat.
But we're noticing it.
Yes.
And I think 20 years ago, if you found, or maybe even 10 years ago, if you found a beehive in your siding and it was a honey beehive, I don't think it would matter. You would rip that out of there.
Right.
Now we know every beekeeper you can call will make you spend the money to relocate it.
Right.
And also take care of the problem, because honey creates mold.
Right.
And so we're learning things, and I think we're reacting as fast as anybody has in history. We're trying. There's people that just aren't going to do things. Right. But we now know that's a problem, because now mass media is making things aware to everybody.
Well, and that's where the faith and reason work together. where science and faith, science and theology work together. Because if we say theologically we believe that we have a responsibility to care for God's creation, science helps us figure out how to do that. So we don't have to choose. It's both and. That we have this responsibility as people of faith, and our scientists help us figure out how to make the best choices, the most sustained, how to do the things that we need to do. One of the other elements that I'm aware of, and I think this is harder within U.S. culture, is a sense of proportionality, and this goes back to the consumption thing. The last time I looked at the numbers, the population in North America, is it North America? Or maybe it's just the U.S. Sorry, I don't have this in my head. Is like 6% of the world's population, but we consume 40% of the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I've seen a lot of different numbers.
Yeah. Well, we obviously consume a whole lot more
We
than...
consume more than 6%, yes.
Wait, yeah,
We, yes.
right.
Right.
So,
But we have the mechanisms to be able to do that.
right,
We also share a lot
correct.
with the rest of the world, including food. I listen to the Farm Report.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why. It's always bad news.
You bring the farm report demographic way down in
I'm
Hinge,
not a
I'm
farmer,
sure.
so, but it's interesting that they feel they're seeing booms of population all over the world,
Uh-huh.
and they haven't the means to support themselves.
Right.
So they said a farmer today will have to produce 2 times as much yield within the next 15 years. That's baffling to me.
Yeah, that's
Oh.
huge.
But I've never seen a study saying that the United States is going to grow by 2 times in the next 15 years.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's
That would
we
be
have a
exceptional.
lot available to us. It's
Yeah.
hopefully we're
Well,
good stewards with all that.
In relation to stewardship and consumption, we've also done really well in the last 10 years or so on addressing extreme poverty. You know, is it 2020? The goal was to cut extreme poverty by significant margins, and we're doing it. But again, it has to do with awareness and studying delivery systems and how to. I mean, we produce enough for everyone to eat, but it doesn't get to where everybody needs to eat.
Right.
Amazon can get me a package in a day. I'm serious. You know, if we have a natural disaster, they're going to use Walmart's logistics system to get it to us. The vaccines. I don't know that you can do that worldwide. I mean, I'm in Rotary Club, and we're trying to wipe out polio, and we're finding that the 4 countries that are left are the hardest ones
Yeah.
because there's no roads, there's no delivery system.
Mm.
It's very difficult.
And yet we know about that because of things that exist in the, in contemporary days and modern world, mass communication and the rest of it. And the knowledge, becoming aware of it, means that we become responsible. That there's an ethical expectation that if we become aware of a way in which the creation is threatened, we need to do something about it, that's what people of faith do. It occurred to me that that maybe I should also sort of bring in a New Testament reference here for the Christians in the conversation too. And the scripture that first came to me when thinking about this is it's actually the text that I preached the first time in seminary. And it's about Jesus describing himself as the shepherd and the one who lays down his life for the sheep. And the idea that when we have responsibility, we tend to the other. We tend to creation. We tend to our neighborhoods and our communities. That we don't privilege ourselves first, but we look to care for those around us. That to be made imago Dei, to be disciples of Jesus, is again to be creating, giving, sustaining, blessing. The purpose of our lives is to do all of those things for those around us, even to the extent of the creation. And there's something really beautiful about that for me, and the ethic is really clear in that for me. Even though we may each of us may choose to respond differently because, for me it's a wall, and for you it's a rope, and for you it's a hose, but really it's the elephant. That each of us live in a different place, and we each have different skills, and we each have responsibilities, and we each have different ways that we can respond. What do you think?
I when I read scripture, I'm a tend to be like a rubber when the rubber hits the road kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm always thinking about concrete. What does this look like in our life? What does it look like to be a shepherd who walks with and through and in and among creation?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like locally? What does it look like on a global level? And how does what we do locally affect the global level?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's hard sometimes to see the big picture and to know that the little things we do locally are actually part of shepherding globally.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's sort of like, what size is your box? At what level is your lens focused? Is your lens focused in your family or in your neighborhood or your county or country or hemisphere? And I think it's okay for us to have different levels of focus. I mean, we have different gifts, so it would make sense that there are people who are devoted to their communities, and that's the place they can be most effective. And then there are people who are astonishingly well suited to work on the international scale and figure out those distribution systems and figure out how to make that happen. And it's a good thing that all of that's happening at the same time, instead of all of us working on the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Steve's comments in the chat box popped up, and it caught my mind. It caught my eye, and his comment on how he finds creation imagery in hymns, for the beauty of the world. And what a great source for learning more about creation scripture and hearing.
We sang St. Francis's Canticle of the Sun yesterday, and I love singing this song, this poem that's 800 years old, and seeing God in all the creation, and seeing, identifying different aspects of creation as our family, as brother, sister, mother, father, that we have these relationships with creation that is family. And I think that's really powerful. And I love the fact that across eons, across cultures, across traditions, we have all of those connections get made in different ways. I have a little book called Earth Prayers from Around the World, and I thought I would just offer a couple of these. From Hildegard of Bingen, who is one of this amazing mother of the church, who was a philosopher and educator and physician and linguistic guru, and
she's a composer too. Not many people know that.
Yeah, and artist, and she's one that royalty and popes would seek out for wisdom. This lovely line: holy persons draw them to themselves all that is earthly. Holy persons draw to themselves all that is earthly. And I love that imagery sort of over against some of the Greek dualism where spirit and earth are separate, and spirit is good and earth is bad, and the dualisms that divide us instead of this sort of deep spiritual wisdom. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, writes, "I entrust myself to the earth. Earth entrusts herself to me." Or W.E.B. Du Bois, Lord, make us mindful of the little things that grow and blossom in these days to make the world beautiful for us. I like that notion of mindfulness, and that's sort of what we were talking about, how you can find God anywhere and everywhere if we're willing to look, if we're willing to open our hearts and minds and ears and eyes and noses and senses of touch and discover the Spirit moving. I think this is our longest open glen yet.
Jim says it takes a lot of pixels to make a great picture.
I like it. It also reminds me of pointillism, right?
Yeah.
The painting technique where entire vistas are made up of tiny, tiny dots. It's early pixelation.
Yeah.
And up close, it just looks like dots. But it's not until you step back and you get some perspective that you see the wonder that's been created. Yeah.
We always want more dots. It's funny because the 4K TVs is supposed to be the most pixels that the human eye can see.
Huh.
Yet now they're gonna make 8K TVs.
So what happens with the rest of the information?
Right.
I don't know.
Overload.
I don't know what those of you that are in the chat feed, are there things where in creation do you see God? Or how do you as disciples make faithful choices about caring for creation? Is anybody willing to be brave and respond to either of those questions? Or Aaron or Dara?
Can you repeat your second question?
How do you, as disciples, make choices to care for creation?
Is the action that I'm doing, is it life-giving or life-depriving? And if the things that I do or say or think or not do is the big one. Is that creating life and part of giving life? Or is that taking away from the life and the quality of some other part of creation? Whether that be a person or a tree.
I was talking to a friend about taking care of the earth, and some people don't. And he had said, don't you want to preserve the earth for future generations? And I think to some that's a motivating, well, to most, if you have children, that's a big motivating factor.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other better reasons in addition to that we should be good stewards of the earth?
Yeah.
Because we're as humans, we're embedded with longevity being, creating life to go on.
Right.
Is huge.
Right. Well, it calls to my mind the Native American wisdom of, when you're considering a choice, you think to the seventh generation. What choice I make now, what will be the impact 7 generations
And
forward?
That's I think the average person can't. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he said he has known 6 generations of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's impossible, John. And he said, no. And he went through it. And the first one was a funeral. So, he was like 5. So, but that's almost unfathomable to know 7 and to worry about 7. But he's seen 6 of mine.
Right.
So it's possible.
I know 5 generations of some families in our congregation. I know more generations of some families in our congregation than I know of my own. And I don't think the notion of considering the 7th generation is necessarily that any one person would know that, but it's the wisdom of taking into consideration the long-range view versus the short-termers advantage. So I could make a choice that benefits me right now, but what's the implication of it tomorrow or next year or generations? Yeah. I think it's poetic. I think it inspires us. I'm thinking maybe I'll share a prayer with you and wind things down for tonight. Can somebody check the date for next month? I think we're going a week earlier than we had originally planned. Is it the
Third Thursday, 19th?
the 19th of
You said you're out of
May?
town, right?
The 19th of May. We'll be on for our next Open Glen. And we hope to see you then. And please share the invitation with others so that they can join the conversation. And I thought I would end with this. This is from Celtic Prayers from Iona by J. Philip Newell. And one of the things I love about Celtic Christianity is the way in which the theology and spirituality is deeply connected with creation. I mean, a lot of the people who first wrote, first carved, first sang some of these songs were people who were shepherds and bakers and people who went out in the heather to pray. So I offer you this blessing as we wrap up our time tonight, and I hope to see you next time. You are the love of each living creature, O God. You are the warmth of the rising sun. You are the whiteness of the moon at night. You are the life of the growing earth. You are the strength of the waves of the sea. Speak to me this night, O God. Speak to me your truth. Dwell with me this night, O God. Dwell with me in love. Thanks for everybody for being here tonight. Blessings, blessings.